Oh, sorry. Give me one more second.
Yeah, no rush.
Okay, we are both now live and recording. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of Community Board 14. It's 6:32. I hope everyone had a good holiday. We have 2 items on the agenda. The first item is regarding street co-naming. We're kind of circling back on the small barrage of street co-naming public hearings that we had prior to October at the bequest of one of our council members. And we wanted to put it on the agenda here tonight so we can talk more about what our internal process is regarding street co-namings, if there will be one at all. So I wanted to start this agenda item with the discussion amongst the executive committee and interested board members about whether or not we should be hearing requests or applications for street co-namings to begin with. We don't entertain them directly from an applicant. We take them from the request of a council member in our district. I see there are many people here who attended those public hearings, and I wanted to open the discussion with that question. Should we be hearing applications, creating a public forum for street co-namings, or should we leave them to the council member? And the reason why I start with this question is because it's inconsistent amongst the council members that are in our district to whom we hear them. We're not being brought all of those applications from all council members. So if you would like to chime in on the discussion, raise your hand and I'll call on you, and you can give me your thoughts, particularly with regards to the last 2 rounds that we had looked at. And I see Steve Cohen, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is if the council member wants us to weigh in, we may as well weigh in. I mean, we're an advisory board representing the community, so if we have input and we're like we could be the first line of input to let the council member know. I kind of see no reason why not to just assist our council members in this way if we're asked to, and conceivably there might be other things that council members want us to weigh in on, which we might want to.
Thank you for that. Barton, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I guess is the question that
Sorry to interrupt, your volume's a little low.
the question just that we listen to one fair joke about now. Question more that you're here to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we still can't hear you. Maybe you have a pair of headphones or a better external mic. But I'm gonna come back to you, okay? Sean, you have your hand up.
Yeah, without the benefit of Barton's question, the one thing I heard him start with, is it a question of, and then I heard the word or. So I just kind of wanted to jump in to share, some of the stuff I've talked to you about, Joanne, which is a concern about there being this sort of very disparate and uneven application of public process on these street co-namings. So when we're asked to weigh in on some, but then others are done by the initiative of council members, and not only have we not been asked to weigh in on them, we haven't been notified of all of them. Some of them we've been invited to a ribbon cutting for a street co-naming that we weren't aware of until invited to a ribbon cutting, and others proceeded without that invitation. So it just feels weird that there are different different barriers or different hurdles or different criteria in different parts of the district, depending on different variables. And that's really where my discomfort lies is there a way to make this more just even Steven across the district? And where there isn't, because I hear you, Steve, if we're being asked, because that's what we've always said to people who call the community board and say, I understand that I have to start at the community board, and we always say, well, really it's this district's practice to defer to the council member, and we kick them back to the council member. And that's been the tradition of the board, because there's kind of no sense in having a public hearing for a street co-naming that a council member isn't going to be supportive of, or putting yourself at odds with a council member who's proposing a street co-naming. So I think it's just one of those unique qualities of being one of the few boards that overlap with 4 council members. And I want to just add that sort of murky mishmash to why we're having the conversation.
All right, thank you for that. Pardon, did you want to give it another shot? Well, you're still muted, if that's helpful. Okay, all right. Well, welcome to put it in the chat. I'll read it, okay, and I'll read it out loud. So I'll move on to Elizabeth.
Hi. Yeah, I think that one of the things that I find a little weird about it is that we are like, or about, I mean, you know, is that I think previously we were being like given the council members criteria for it, and applications were not necessarily being discussed clearly as relating to some of those. So I guess like to me, some of like I think it's reasonable if we want to like I agree that it would be ideal to have like a uniform process throughout the district. I think that it makes sense though if if we're not giving the opportunity to weigh in, or people or council members do want us to take that as we should provide a forum for people if they want to weigh in. But I think that it's a little confusing when we're being given these other criteria, and it's not necessarily clear how some of the applicants meet that criterion. I'm like thinking a lot about how I voted against one of them, and like they all seemed like very worthy people, but because they were being held against the standards of against the criteria stated from the council member, I didn't see how one of these people fit into that standard, even though like their story is very important and something that I think could have been, recognized in this way in the district. And I guess like maybe it would make sense if we're going to do this on like kind of a piecemeal basis, and we're not going, if we are going to potentially have our own, not have our own, either have our own standards or not, it would be good to get more clarity and to like try to focus the discussion to those things. I think I know this is a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I think that it's like I found it like a slightly strange process to be weighing in on it because of that that situation. And I think that that's one we should try to resolve if we're going to provide this forum, because we want to be very transparent, and we want to make it very transparent for community members who might want to weigh in to give their input about these matters, if that makes sense.
So I just want to look for some clarity there. So the criteria that was applied to board members prior to the second public hearing were criteria that city council holds for addressing these street co-namings. So what I just want to clarify is you feel like there wasn't enough discussion on each of those points about each of these applications?
No, I think that more there wasn't. I guess I was like a little surprised that an application, like it felt like to me, and of course people can disagree, that like some of these applications did not necessarily meet those standards, and I think that that was maybe why some people were voted against them. Not, but it was very helpful at one of them where someone had, like one of the people presenting it had made a clear point to be like, this person hits these standards in these ways, and I think that we didn't have like the ability to get. Like, there's not as much of a process where we can then go back and be like, excuse, like, it's a little rude to just kind of be like, hey, like, I don't see how this person meets these qualities. Like, could you please say this? So maybe like suggesting that people presenting specifically attest to those to those criterion, if that's the criterion we're going to use going forward, instead of just talking about how someone is a great person and part of the community, which is all true. I guess it's weird to vote. I guess what I'm trying to say is it was weird to vote on something where we're voting on someone else's standard, that we didn't necessarily have all the information about, like, if they, like, I guess not having that information, to me, like, I don't know if it's because these people did not meet that standard necessarily, or if it's because the information about how they met that standard was not very clearly presented at these meetings. And
So-
that, I think, is what I want the clarity on in the future.
So let me stop you there. That each of the applicants in the second public hearing that we had, when we had that criteria in hand, they were instructed that they had to demonstrate that the applicant met the criteria. So if at any point, which apparent to several board members who had voted one way or another, they did not meet the criteria. So if they didn't present the information during the public hearing, it's because either they evaded the question or they neglected to answer it. And I think that also speaks to this concept of process, that if we decide to hear them, and I think Steve Cohen makes a good case, you know, if a council member is asking us to weigh in, then we should weigh in. Then I think, you know, the rigors are probably going to be a little bit higher. I think we should think about having a set of standards that go beyond what the city council has already laid out. And then, you know, we have to make sure that the applicant meets each of those criteria. And at that point, because they will be instructed prior to whatever meeting that would be, then if we're not getting the information, I think it's fair to ask a question about, you know, criteria number 4 wasn't met. Can you meet this criteria? And if not, then, you know, the vote is accordingly. I see Carl Henry Cesar has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Brown and folks. Good evening. I apologize. I'm just trying to situate the conversation for myself, and so I just want to confirm if my understanding of the question is correct. Is this conversation about whether from this moment forward, Community Board 14 should provide input in street code naming requests, whether they come from City Council or the community itself? Or is the question B, when Community Board 14 receives a street code naming request from the City Council or the community, how best does it proceed? Like, I'm trying to figure out if this conversation is about A or B, or if I completely understand the scope incorrectly and it's something else. That's my question.
Okay. So the question at hand right now is whether or not we should hear them at all. And because the practice of this community board has been that we only hear applications for street code namings directly from a council member, then it would only be directly from a council member. So the council member's office would initiate with us. We would not hear an application directly from the applicant without city council support.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate that.
All right. Corazon, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Good evening. I was just going to say that I think if we do hear from applicants wanting to do street namings, there should be something more uniform that's presented, I guess, because I did feel that for the October 3rd, I think that's the date that had that public hearing, that the 2 things of evidence or whatever that was submitted, one of them was like 1 paragraph, and then the other person had like a lot of like evidence backing it up. But I was like, I don't want to be an a-hole for saying like, you know, but I didn't know what to say. So how do you even vote? But so I was just gonna say, if we are gonna like hear about that, so I think there should be maybe something a little bit more fleshed out that is submitted. That was what I was gonna say.
Thank you for that. So again, I don't think we have a lot of control over what the applicant submits based on our criteria. And all we can do is weigh in based on the amount of information that's provided. I think first and foremost, what's missing is larger community engagement regarding street co-namings, because several, and I was going to get into this after, we actually make the decision whether we're going to hear them overall. But other community boards throughout Brooklyn have more stringent guidelines, and they're really focused on petitioning around the area of the street that's going to be co-named, and then sufficient public announcement, which would be on the onus of the applicant to let the public know and the businesses know in the area that this is being considered. And I can give you examples of that once we move forward with the decision that we're going to hear them or not. I see Sean's hand is up first, and then Carl.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the conversation. Well, the past recent street co-namings were done in a kind of a whirl. We were asked to do it. We were asked to turn it around really quickly. And so there were a lot of conversations back and forth between this office and the council member's office as to who was going to ensure that the criteria, at least the minimum criteria set by city council were met. And that the council member's office was supposed to do that. But then after that first one, it didn't feel like there was enough of public assurance. So we submitted, I think that a questionnaire or a list of criteria, which is why the quality of the second applications was a little bit better in meeting those criteria. But if this board does develop criteria, I think there's a lot of control over ensuring that the applicant endeavors to demonstrate that they meet the criteria. And there will be another part to this conversation, it seems to me, that this board will want to develop its own criteria, maybe very closely based on criteria that's already out there from other boards. But, there's both a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect, and you're going to be able to empirically demonstrate that X% of the block in question signed a support petition, and empirically, I'm sure, document that the person is deceased. And then there's going to be stuff about, how good the person was and how much they did for the community that will be a little more subjective. But that would have to be developed. And the reason why it wasn't developed in those hearings is because we were asked to do it very quickly, and we were assured that the council member's office was making sure that they met, that they were eligible to be put on an omnibus bill in city council.
Thanks for that. Carl, go ahead.
I withdraw my stuff. I mean, Sean basically touched upon it. I was just thinking along what Sean basically mentioned. I was thinking along the lines of whenever we have developer proposals in front of us, and we basically say like yes with reservations or no with reservations. And what Sean proposed was, in my head, I viewed it as something along those lines. If I end up voting yes, we should accept co-naming applications brought to us by city council. So that's it, Chairwoman. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Barton, I see your hand is up.
Can you hear me this time? Unbelievable. Third time's a charm. All right. So in all this interim here where I've been trying to futz with my computer, here's my question. First of all, how many co-namings have we traditionally had in the district each year? Sean, do you have a sense?
None. These were our first since I've been here. We've had 3 in 12 years, and they were 3 just a few months ago.
Okay, that's interesting. I was under the impression that maybe that we only saw them when the council members chose to come to us with them. But
Well,
actually,
that's
this is
true. But that's how often that's happened.
Oh, but I'm wondering, I mean, how many other co-namings have there been without our participation that the council members had initiated that we never got to chime in on? 5, 10, something on that scale per year?
Not per year. 5, 10, Joanne, if you want to take a guess, I can only think of 4, but there's probably more.
Okay, then
I
guess
definitely know
my-
of one this year.
Okay, so I don't see much of a downside to our requesting that all council members come to us to ask for our input. I mean, if it's that few, it's not an extra, excessive burden on either the staff or the board. They don't have to, I suppose. I mean, as I understand the way the procedure works, but they certainly don't have to. But I personally would like to make a request of all the council members that if there is a co-naming, that they bring it to us. Then I certainly think that we should have established criteria, including like 51% or more, or whatever, of all the residents of a block have to sign a petition, and that those criteria need to be sent to the applicant in advance of when they come to us. That way, there's no, hey, we didn't know, why don't you just take our word for it? And that they will be prepared, the council will know to refer them to us. And then we consider it in accordance with those criteria. I mean, to Sean's point, yeah, whether or not a person was quote unquote a good person is not exactly a criterion that, one can mandate. And there'll certainly be, a little more subjective discussions on that. But when it comes to certain number of residents or how long the person lived on that block, and whether or not the person is deceased, et cetera, I think those will be much more hard and fast. So there we go. You should have let me stay mute.
All right, thank you for that. Glad we got you. Glad we got your technical issues overcome. Gail Smith.
Hi. One of them you had started mentioning, Joanne, because I would be curious on what the other community boards are doing in this regard. And my other question is, does Borough Hall have any loose protocols or anything of that nature in this regard? Or is this strictly for the city council and the board to partake?
There is no precedence at Borough Hall. This is strictly between the community board, if included, and the city council member.
All right, thank
It
you.
happens twice a year. It happens in October and in April. So
Okay.
We definitely, if we have decided that we're going to hear these applications, we should have some protocols in place so that the applications can be done in a manner that they can go before city council by April. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same place that we are now.
All right, thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, so I'm going to take one more question on whether or not we're going to actually hear these, and then Edson, go ahead.
Just a quick comment to what Barton had said. In the chat, I wrote there was plenty of street namings. In fact, former council member of this district, that's all they spent time doing, I believe. And we can look on the record as far as legislation passed versus the amount of street namings. I think they're about equivalent, if not more so, on street namings. During my time on the board, CB14 was never involved, and this is frankly just more of a photo op for this former council member in their newsletter.
All right, thank you very much for that. So is there a consensus among the executive committee and interested board members that we will hear them? And I'll sort of say that in reverse. Does anyone here feel like we should not be hearing these applications? All right. So I think there's a lot of minutia involved in coming up with appropriate guidelines to add what the city council already has in place. I'll just quickly give you some ideas. And then we might want to consider actually creating, go ahead, Sean. You're muted.
Just a quick finer point on what was just decided. The board will hear them upon request, or are we going to reach out to council members once criteria are developed to say, it is our preference to hear all street co-namings before they move forward in the city council and invite them to bring their proposals before us? Or are we going to still refer people who come to this office asking what the process is to the council members and do it only upon council member request?
No, I would only, to the merit of pointing out the fact that we don't want to hear an application that might be contrary to a council member's position on street co-namings in their district. I would recommend to the board that we only hear applications that come from council members. That is, so if an applicant reaches out to the office, they will be deferred to their council member. The council member feels it's worthy, they will come back to us. And I think if we're going to go through the trouble to create our own criteria, then once it is complete, then we will let all the council members know that we have a criteria in place, and we would entertain hearing their applications or applications that are coming from their office. Okay, so getting back to what I was talking about. So I'll tell you what Community Board 8 is doing. If the honoree meets the guidelines set forth by City Council, and the application should be submitted to the board office and will be reviewed by their Livable Streets Committee. So they have a committee called Livable Streets that is hearing these applications. If the application is approved on principle, that means that they have met those there is some principle there that it should be reviewed further. The applicant shall petition the community and will provide proof of notice to residents and businesses within a reasonable radius. These documents will be brought before the committee for review in a formal meeting during a regularly scheduled committee meeting. If the committee approves the final documents, a recommendation of approval will be brought before the full board for a vote. So that's Community Board 8. Community Board 5 requires that a petition of residents and individuals in a 2-block radius be provided. And then Community Board 6 requires that the honoree be deceased for 3 years. City Council only requires 2 years. A petition of 50 signatures within 1/4 mile of the proposed location, and 20 of those 50 signatures will be from residents or businesses on the street itself. These documents will be reviewed by the executive committee in a committee, and this committee meeting will be publicly noticed to the community by the applicant, very similarly the way special permits are done in our office. So those are 3 community boards who are handling it in a sort of similar way. What I want to say is I feel like there's a lot to hash out about that, and there might be other ideas, and I don't want any of that information or feedback to be lost in this meeting here. It might bode to actually form a subcommittee to form this criteria. Any thoughts or discussion about that amongst board members and the executive committee? Barton, you have your hand up.
I think there's some great ideas in there. I think we could pick and choose from those and maybe others from other, boards. And I think a task force, sort of ad hoc, just hammer out, recommendations and bring it to the board for a vote. And then we have the criteria set. So that sounds like an excellent way to proceed.
Thank you, Barton. Would anyone else like to comment or add to the discussion about this? So I'll say that from other information that I read, this was put under the purview of the transportation committee, but I think I like that my only problem with forming an ad hoc committee is staffing that ad hoc committee and asking for volunteers upon all of the other volunteer work that we do here, and co-chairing and our other task force, which is pretty important. So that's let me just ask you, how many people here would sit on an ad hoc committee? It doesn't have to be many people. It's just a matter of maybe one meeting, which would probably be an hour long, just to hammer out and make recommendations to the full board of what those guidelines would look like. Additional guidelines to what the city council already has in place. So how many people here would be willing to sit on it? I see 1, 2, I see 4. Okay, we've got some people. All right. Okay. So I'm sorry, I just want to read some of the things that are in the chat. Okay. Alrighty, so good. I appreciate everyone who put their hand up. I'm counting on you to at least be at that one meeting where you can deliberate over adding some of these concepts from other community boards. So I guess I'll ask for a motion to form a very short-lived ad hoc committee called the Street Co-naming Guideline Ad Hoc Committee.
I'll put forward that motion.
Is that motion seconded?
Second.
Okay. Anyone opposed to forming this ad hoc committee? All right, so at our general meeting, I will put it before the full board as a recommendation from the executive committee and interested board members to form this small ad hoc committee, which will just go ahead and bolster the city council guidelines with some thoughtful ways in which we can make sure that there is full community engagement regarding street co-namings. All right, Sean, go ahead.
At the risk of seeming undemocratic for the second time in a night, would the ad hoc committee be limited to the people who are on this meeting tonight, so that they already have the benefit of the conversation in the background going into it? Or are you going to open it to the full board? I mean, I guess I'm asking, has the ad hoc committee just been formed by those who raised their hands here and now? Are you presenting this slate?
I mean, that would be my hope. I find the hardest thing is about forming these ad hoc committees is that it's hard to really garner the volunteership in it and stock them. So if we can go ahead and get a commitment from the people who raise their hand here, say that you are the slate, I'd be happy to announce the slate at the meeting. Then it's one and done, and then we will schedule the meeting probably in January, get that hammered out, and we'll get them approved by February, so we'll be ready for April. How does that sound, Sean?
Sounds like a great plan. And I just want to make sure, either put your name in the chat or email me just to make sure that I had everybody. I just got Liz, Steve, Carl, Musa, Barden, and Deborah, so I'm not sure if that was everybody. If I missed you, put it in the chat, please. Lawrence,
yeah. All right. Well, again, I want to thank everybody who volunteered to do that. I think it's going to be a lot more productive than trying to hammer it out tonight. And you could be a little bit more thoughtful, and we can share some links with you with the other community boards, and you'll have some already know to me, but I guess gotcha. All right, just reading in the chat. All right, so if there are no other questions or concerns regarding this agenda item, I'm just going to move to the next agenda item, which is regarding the way that we are going to conduct meetings going forward. If you all recall, in June, this community board passed a resolution that stated that in as long as there was a state of emergency, we would be meeting remote for both general meetings and for topical committees and ad hoc committees and public hearings. One of the reasons why we had an in-person meeting for November is because the state's state of emergency was not renewed, and the cities, we were not sure if the city was going to renew the state of emergency, and we didn't want to be left out of compliance. I think many people will agree with me that it was a good experience to have the general meeting in person. And we can't 100% be sure if the state of emergency in New York City is going to continue. It's being renewed on a month-by-month basis. I think right now it's been renewed up until January, if memory serves me correctly. It's January 22nd. The way the open meeting law is construed, if we are a public body and going to be making decisions, we need to be meeting in a way that the public can have access, and that's going to be in person. Now, however, most of the work that is done in this community board is in committee. And so Sean and I met with our legal committee, who are attorneys on this board, 3 members, and we went over the open meeting law, and it was determined that if there are no binding decisions made during committee meetings, which there are no binding decisions, they're usually recommendations, we can continue to meet, our committees can continue to meet remotely, and that will promote the largest amount of public engagement. And I think that's really important. So we need to have another resolution to form or to, organize how we're going to move forward with meeting, based on the fact that the concept of a state of emergency, especially a public health state of emergency, is sort of not guaranteed right now. It's really just based on the mayor's renewal of such. So what I think that we should do, and as I've said, is that we should probably meet in person, because in person for our general meetings, because those are where our binding decisions occur. It's already been stated that we don't have the capability yet to have hybrid meetings, so they will be in person and they will be live streamed, but there will be no two-way, communication between those that are offsite and those that are on site. And then all of the committee meetings will remain as remote via Webex. I see that there are a few hands up. I want to get to those questions before I say anything further. So, Deborah Valentin, you have your hand up. Is that left over from before? I'm going to guess that it is. Liz Denise, if you have a question or comment.
Yeah, I had a couple of quick questions. One, I was noting that, or I guess I've noted that in some other community boards, there is a brief public session speaking at the beginning of the general board meeting, in part because they often have recommendations from committees, but not everyone necessarily goes to them. And so when there is a public vote, they like to have another chance for people who maybe don't have good access remotely or something to have these meetings to weigh in before the decision is made. I don't know if that's something that this board should be considering, or if it's something, I don't really know how some boards got to this structure versus ours where we don't have any discussion there. I think it's certainly more streamlined to have the discussion in one place where everyone is present for kind of all of the discussion at a committee meeting, but just something to consider. And if this is super off topic, because I apologize. I think like when I read the topic of like attendance here, one of the questions I had a little bit was or in the email about this was just that I didn't know if there was a goal to try to like increase attendance generally among board members and the public at our meetings. I certainly think that's something that I think most board members would agree that's a good idea, and a good goal. And I sort of wonder if one of and this is probably something to just stick a pin in for a lot later. But I do think that the way that we release meeting dates, the general board meeting is the most accessible meeting for people to get to because those dates have been announced like basically a year in advance. And then the committee meetings sometimes coming out like since they don't have a regular schedule, I think has posed some issues for people I know in the community to make it to meetings that they want to go to. And I know it's a little easier with Webex and doing them virtually, but it was just, like I said, I know this might not be the topic here, but it's something that I've been hearing a lot about and might be worth thinking about because maybe that informs a little bit of why people have some public comment at the beginning before decisions are officially made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the practice of this board is that we do not have discussions in the general meeting about topics that we've had at a committee meeting because we've just had an hour and a half, a 2-hour meeting in a committee. So unlike maybe other boards who don't freely give out the WebEx access so that the public can ask questions, if you contact Community Board 14, we will give you the WebEx link. So everyone is free to join a meeting. And if they have comments, they can raise their hand and they will be called on by the co-chairs. So it just doesn't make sense for us to have a public comment period in the beginning of a general meeting about matters that we've already discussed. And then regarding agenda item, regarding an announcement of topical committee meetings far in advance, those agenda items are really chosen a month or two in advance. You're asking from a commitment from a city agency or some other community-based organization. Sometimes we reserve those committee meetings to revolve around something significant that's going on in the district. So unfortunately, having a month's notice for a topical committee is the way that it is because they're more topical and they're more relevant to the time at hand. I hope that answers your question. Carl, go ahead.
All right, a bit of a lag. Can folks hear me?
Yes, you can't see us, but yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. So 2 things. I do like the idea of keeping some aspect of the meetings virtual, the committees. Like I do agree. I want to tie some things together. Like I share Elizabeth's thing where I would like to see participation increase overall, in the board meetings and also the committee meetings as well. And then the second question I have too is the idea of the general board meetings being in person. The question I have is, if the committee ends up voting yes, does that mean effective this upcoming December one, each monthly board meeting through June would be in person, or would that mean that if the committee votes yes today, that would mean effective the January board meeting, each one would be in person through June? So I'm just wondering what would be the start if the board votes yes.
Well, our December meeting is going to be in person. That's already been scheduled.
Okay, yeah.
And I have a draft resolution, but it, I haven't been well, so it was finished yesterday after the reminder for the meeting went out, and it wasn't appropriate to just, I know how you guys hate when I read the resolution and don't have a text in front of you. So we're going to send that draft resolution out to the board prior to the general meeting for everyone's review. And we'll see where it goes from there. Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my steam here.
That's all right. Thank you.
Next question is from Corazon.
Hi, thank you. I was just gonna say, is there a way that we could also access the Link NYC things? Because I saw CB9 had advertised one of their meetings a couple of weeks ago.
We do.
And okay, so would that be something to suggest to like committees if they wanted to?
They're all on there. Corazon, we send every meeting to the Link NYC thing according to their deadlines.
Oh,
It
I
should
mean, I've
all be
never
on there.
Oh, I've never, I mean, that was the first time I saw it pop up on the street like that. So I thought
All
that was
right.
just,
Good to know. We'll check and make sure they're being posted, and I'll ask the people who walk like the bids to make sure that they're popping up. But we send them all of our meetings and events.
okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Ephraim, you're next. Hi, Ephraim.
Good evening, how are you? A few points. Number one, I think personal meetings are great. Unfortunately, not everybody's able to make them. Now that we have this new thing that we can go on Webex, maybe it's a possibility for those members that are unable to make it for personal reasons, that they can be put on Webex for the meeting, at least to hear it, see it, what's going on. Number one. Number two, I noticed a new thing on the agenda for this month is we're having a public hearing right before the board meeting. Past experience has shown that 15 minutes allotted is not sufficient. Maybe it's an idea that the paperwork for this particular meeting for, I think, a special permit should go out to all members prior, they can review it. Because I don't see how they will review it by the big room over there. As we've had in the past, the community board office, they gave out the plans, et cetera, everybody was there.
Okay, that's been heard, and I'll see if we can get the plans from Jake Goldstein. I did a 15-minute hearing because past experience has shown that has been sufficient. So I was going based on that, and then the huge time lag we had in between the last one. And then just to be clear, the reason why I put the public hearing in front of the board meeting instead of having a separate night for it was because the public hearing, since it is actionable, based sort of on this architecture that Joanne is talking about, since it's sort of a decision that's going as a recommendation and there's a vote, and it isn't just by consensus, but a full vote. I think it was decided that public hearings and board meetings, and this is up for debate, but public hearings and board meetings should be public, whereas committee meetings can still be held remotely, because they aren't binding. And the Greg, legal committee can jump in if I've mangled, but that's why the public hearings are now all before the board meeting, and the intention is to keep them that way.
I understand that part. The only problem there is that we're sort of like missing all the details unless we're sending out prior.
Yeah. Well, the hard copies will be available as they've always been at the regular public hearings in the past. So those paper copies should be available the night of, but I will ask the attorneys to make sure that we have digital copies that can be distributed to the board members. And I'll let you know what they say. And if they say, okay, then we'll distribute them. I think the other thing, if the hearing, and this, Joanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the hearing goes longer, you can start our public meeting a little bit later within reason if we went, 5 minutes, even 10 minutes over, but we can't start it earlier.
Understood.
Okay, we'll see how it goes, though. It can always be adjusted in the future.
The only question is if people get on Webex, if they can't make it, that's the only question at the moment. I guess if you checked into.
Well, yeah, this public hearing and this general meeting, and for this foreseeable future, there will not be a Webex link to join. You will only be able to watch these live meetings, this public hearing and these general meetings via live stream on YouTube. It's not going to be on Webex because we don't have the capability to do a hybrid right now.
Depending where we have the meetings. Over here, you may not have it. In Old Hill, you may have it though.
It's also a principle too. I mean,
it's for emergencies,
Well, the cost already there's a cost involved for us to live stream our general meetings, and that cost becomes greater if it's a hybrid.
Yeah.
So you know, it's the principle is in the fact that if the open meeting law is going to require us to have a hybrid meeting, then there needs to be funding for that.
There's
But
plenty of funding. I wouldn't worry about it. You just gotta like let it out.
But I just want to touch upon the fact that once the emergency, the disaster emergency evaporates from the city, the way that you co-chairs are going to be doing things in committee has to change a little bit with regards to recommendations. You won't be able to solicit a vote among the board members and committee members that are present. You'll only be able to find consensus because, again, if it's a virtual meeting, it's non-binding. So you'll basically, you know, and we'll set forth a set of, you know, a language that you can use when there is no state of emergency by saying, do I have a consensus, rather than asking for a vote. So let me know if you have any questions about that. And then if we feel as though if a committee meeting is going to be contentious, for example, or is going to require a vote, for a binding vote from the committee members for a recommendation to the full board, then we'll have that meeting in person and we'll have it in the board office. And I can think of several instances, you know, there's going to be some transportation committee meetings that probably will have to be in person because you're probably going to want to have a vote and not just a consensus. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Barden, your hand's up.
Yeah, actually, the first thing I had been planning to say is I'm probably stating the obvious, but I think it's great to have the committee meetings Zoomed because they're recorded. I mean, up until Zoom, we did not even, you know, keep minutes from our committee meetings. And I found it hugely valuable to be able to like go back, scroll through, fast forward for certain things and to have, you know, a complete, accurate recording of the events of that particular committee. But coming back to the other topic that was just discussed, I feel very strongly that we should not, I see moving back to consensus as a big step backwards for the board. I really believe that it's important that people be able to feel that they can cast a vote to abstain or deny and that it would be recorded, and that the search for a consensus in every occasion, I feel, disenfranchises people if a certain number of people just all of a sudden pipe up and say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I would be very, very interested to hear if other boards feel similarly constrained. I don't think that something is binding until to my interpretation, until the full board votes on it, and that the committee can vote on making a recommendation to the full board. But I don't think each committee should be bound to simply put forth a consensus and not for people to feel free that they can express their dissent by actually being able to say no or abstaining.
Well, let me just
Sorry to be difficult.
No, you're not. Let me speak to that for a minute. And I think it's just a matter of how a co-chair is going to handle the room. I think it's about, you're not looking for consensus. You're for lack of a better word, you know, do I have a consensus? And people can turn to you and say, no, I do not agree with this issue. And the end result can be, it was a draw or there was no consensus to be found. I mean, I'm probably going to call on members of our legal team who are here today to explain why better than I can. But once the disaster emergency goes away, you cannot have a vote. It's either you come to a consensus, a draw, or you know, there was no support. So it's just a matter of reframing how the topic was perceived among your committee members, your board members in that meeting. So you're not forced to seek a consensus. That's it's just the way, I of course always go with the affirmative, but that might not always be the case in your meeting. And I see Greg has his hand up, so let me just go to him first.
I'll try. So Barton, the thing that we're dealing with here is that whenever you cross that threshold of quote unquote conducting business, and that usually does include some type of decision or some type of action, that's when you get into the situation where maybe we do have to meet in person. And if we do think the overarching goal is to try to have greater participation and to have the convenience factor for folks with the participation on the committees, then we're sort of searching for a way to make sure that the committee meetings are still meaningful, particularly in those instances where we do want to provide something for the overall board to consider. So it's going to be a balancing act, really, how we move forward. So maybe if it's not consensus, maybe still reporting what the meaningful input from the committee was can still help the board move forward from there. But it's just going to be we're going to have to be very careful about it just to make sure we don't run afoul. So that's what we've been trying to wrestle with.
Well, surely Borough Hall must offer some kind of guidance on this, since it's a really important issue.
Arden.
Wow.
Negatory.
Wow.
I mean, that we're having this discussion right now because we really want to retain the robust public engagement that we've had over the past, close to 30 months, and not just lose all that. And once the disaster emergency is lifted and not renewed, then there's two choices. We lose public engagement. We have our meetings in the office, and you can have all the votes you want, or we can really, be able to hear a diverse group of people, including the public and board members who may not be able to show up at that particular time, but can meet remotely, and just do the very best that we can with those action items that are coming into the committee.
So it'll be basically at the chair's discretion to ask whether or not it be virtual or in person, just on the basis of the agenda for a particular. I mean, it doesn't have to be global over the course of a year, but is basically the option going to be up to the chairs on the basis of whether or not they foresee a potentially, voting issue as to whether or not it could be by Zoom or it could be in person.
So once your agenda item is announced, I think you're going to have to make a decision of how important and contentious that is. And then you're going to have to weigh that really seriously on a reduction or the possibility of a reduction in community engagement.
Understood. You and Greg have shown very clearly the balance that we're going to have to try to strike.
Yeah. So, I can certainly see in transportation, I can certainly see the issues going on in Prospect Park South with the flooding. That meeting probably should be in person, or maybe it might not be, based on, you might want to have the widest swath of opinions. So it's going to be a balancing out. Right now, it's not an issue because we're still under the disaster emergency. Okay. So you guys can, still operate the way that you are, but we're just going to, help tailor the language a little bit so you can function appropriately.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Sean, you have your hand up.
Nina's was up before mine. If you want to go to Nina.
Sure.
Actually, just more, I guess, asking for some information here. Do we have numbers regarding participation, not only from board members, but from the community at large, from before the pandemic and then when we went to this virtual format. Did it change significantly?
I can answer that. The short answer is yes. There's been far more participation remotely than there was in person. And that goes for the board too. I mean, Glenn Woolen used to be the only one who came to all committee meetings, and now he has company at meetings outside of his own committee with other board members. And I could get that, quantified. I could look at sign-in sheets from the days of in-person and look at our list for the following meetings, but it's been significantly greater online. And Arden, I wanted to kind of jump in on steering a meeting, that if something becomes unexpectedly dramatic, the committee could always table that item into a board, up into a board meeting, or recognize that it might now rise to the merits of a public hearing and table it for a public hearing. So I don't think anybody's really trapped into anything. And I think as far as consensus goes, anybody who had, a consensus doesn't mean you agree with the thing. It means that it came to some resolution that you could at least live with to bring forward, so that it lives on for a proposal that you can then still vote against. You're not trapped into supporting it once it moves forward. It's just a matter of, is this now in good enough shape to bring before the full board for, discussion ratification, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Oh, I do have one more thing to add, and about the hybrid meetings. I don't know, Joanne, you touched on it, but in order to meet the criteria to hold a hybrid meeting, it's not like whoever wants to come can come and whoever wants to stay home can stay home. The legal definition, or the legal merit that has to be met, is you still have to have a physical quorum in the room. So you have to have enough board members who are saying, I'm willing to show up in person. And then you have to know that you're going to make quorum by that number. And then you're going to have to know who's going to come. And then the people who participate remotely have to have a significant reason. I don't know if that's the word significant, substantial, something like that. And then there's a little bit of controversy, and this is why I got snappy about Borough Hall. There's some controversy over whether or not that reason has to be certified somehow, or if you can self-report. I'm not sure, Joanne, if Borough Board ever came to a final resolution.
I mean, it's just ongoing. It's like we came up with something to, just to be able to work with, but it's going to be amended every single time. I mean, yeah, it was a struggle. It took a special meeting. It took another 40 minutes of another meeting just to come up with procedures for a hybrid meeting.
Right. So then the practical question about the cost of it is, once we still have to have 24 board members in a room, because we don't have full complement, but let's say we get to our 50 board members. Once we need 26 in a room anyway, and our typical attendance is, say, 33, is it really worth spending the extra $100+ per meeting to accommodate the 7 people who want to participate remotely? And maybe the answer is yes, but that's kind of how the question boils down in practical terms. And how are you going to know that you're going to have quorum every time? It's more complicated, but and expensive.
And just to circle back, I mean, and Sean brings up a good point. The discussion, the meat of the discussion of your issue is going to occur in your committee meeting, right? But the vote is still going to happen by the full board, and board members still have an opportunity to stand up at the general meeting to talk about what went on in the topical committee and how they feel about it. Okay, so if consensus wasn't reached in your committee meeting, there's still room for discussion at the general meeting. And then again, as she said, it can still be tabled. Okay, I just want to remind everybody of the time because I'm really fading. It's 7:36. Elizabeth, you're next.
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick. I guess just I think it was at the Lunch and Learn series that there was some, I was watching that there was some suggestion of holding kind of like a public feedback session and then like a discussion session. And I sort of wonder if there, just as an idea, it doesn't have to be something in the resolution, but like a possible thing would be to have a meeting, a committee meeting held, to have the vote be an in-person thing if at the end of it and have some small discussion about it potentially and have the rest of the meeting the committee, like a feedback session or something where we can get that increased attendance from the virtual Webex meeting, perhaps as the start of it. I guess I'm thinking a little bit specifically here because I know that like in the transportation committee, which I serve on, is likely to have things where people would want to maybe come to a vote, as alluded to here a lot. Like some contingents or some groups of constituents, like particularly disabled bus riders, for instance, might not be as able to attend an in-person meeting. And I think it's very valuable that we would hear them. I say that both from the general accessibility issues of in-person meetings, but also with an ongoing pandemic, whether or not there's an ongoing state of emergency. So just something, I wonder if that's something that can also be considered to have a public, a virtual feedback session as part of the meeting, and then something I don't want to like put more time on people as volunteers. Like I know it's very hard to get to a lot of meetings sometimes for people, but just would feel bad not throwing that out there.
Okay, thank you for that. So there's a resolution that's in draft form, which basically states all that we've discussed here. That general meetings will be in person. As you know, public hearings, because they're actionable, will also be in person. And then committee meetings, unless otherwise stated, will be remote. So we'll send out that resolution sometime before the general meeting so that everybody can review it. And certainly you can send in your changes if you have any. And then we'll vote on the resolution at the general meeting so that we have that on the record. And then the last part of this that would have to be done in the next few months is just coming up with a set of procedures for hybrid meetings so that we have them, because that set of procedures has to be ratified by the full board. So perhaps for the next executive committee meeting. Anything else? Sean, do you have anything that you wanted to add? No. Anything else from board members regarding this agenda item? Alrighty. There is no old business to attend to here. Is there any new business from the members of the executive committee? Steve Cohen. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Not exactly new business, but there was an assignment that Shahid and I were given way back pre-COVID about I guess like about I guess criteria for Sean. And I just wanted to see, I know we gave like Sean an evaluation recently, but I wasn't sure if what Shahid and I were asked to do, if that's still something that should be done, or if that it's kind of been already taken care of going forward.
Did I assign that to you?
I think it was before you became chair.
Yeah, I think that was a request for a performance review. And then you were going to set secretary or something like that. And then maybe it got sort of leapfrogged over by the executive committee review that resulted in the clear to the executive committee to decide. But backing up, that there was a request. I could look at it. It's in the minutes somewhere.
Okay.
All right.
So
we'll get some clarity on that
yeah,
and decide.
I'll look it up in the minutes, I'll see exactly what it was, and then we can circle back, as they say.
Yeah, sounds good. I think it just got lost in the shuffle when COVID hit.
All right. Well, seeing that there's no additional new business, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion.
Motion.
Seconded.
Second.
All righty. With no further delay, this meeting is adjourned at 7:42. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week, and I will. If I don't see you, I'll see you at the general meeting.
Joanne, feel
There's a
better.
hou-
Feel better, Joanne.
There's a housing and land
Feel
use
better,
meeting.
Joanne.
Thanks, everybody. Housing and land use Thursday. Be there. Be square.
It'll be a good one.
Have a good night, everyone.
Well, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
See
Good
you in
night.
town square. Good night.
Good night.